Hi, everybody. This overview is not for programmers. This is not for people who have programming experience. I just want to show you the couple of places that you might need to edit in my minimal robot code example to make your mechanisms do what they're supposed to do. So I'm using a slightly different editor than you are. This is IntelliJ, and you're using Eclipse. And don't worry about the fact that some of my things are red. So here's what you need to know. If you open up robot.java, at the very top you see that there are a couple of subsystems. There's the drivetrain, there's the OI, which stands for operator interface, and then there's two more things. There's a motor example subsystem and a piston example subsystem. These are my two examples for how can you just make a motor move and how can you just extend or retract a piston. So the name of my two mechanisms are called motor mechanism and piston mechanism. You could have a single mechanism that has both a motor and a piston inside it. I just made them separate just to keep things simple for us. All right, so what's the part that you need to know? So when your mechanism gets enabled, this is the part of the code that's going to run. It's called teleop init. Init stands for initialize. So what you can do is you can either tell your motor mechanism to do something, or you could tell your piston mechanism to do something. And the way that you tell them to do things is you start with the name. So I might say something like piston mechanism, and then you hit a dot. And if you wait for a second, there's a list of things that you can tell it that you want it to do. So I could tell my piston mechanism to extend the piston, for example. Or I could tell my piston mechanism to retract the piston. Okay, well, so I'm not doing anything with pistons. So I'm telling my motor mechanism to set the motor value. I could give it a number. So 1 would mean go full forward. -1 would mean go full backward. 0 would mean stop. But you can also have numbers in between. So I could say like 0.7. So that would be 70% forward. Usually instead of having numbers, we like to use variable names for our numbers. Because someone else looking at the code isn't going to know what the number 1 here means. But if I have a word like full forward, that makes more sense because I'm saying set the motor to go full forward. Okay, so that's the main thing you need to know is here inside teleop init, if you want to just start your mechanism doing something and you don't need it to change, you don't need it to respond to buttons at all, this is a great place to do it. If you're curious, let's go ahead and look inside motor mechanism to see how it works. So here's subsystems. If you open up motor example subsystem, it looks like this. There's a really important thing that you're going to need to set here. So your motor is a special kind of object called a WPI Talon SRX. So when you create your motor for the first time, there's which happens right here, your motor equals new Talon SRX. There's a number that you have to put in the parentheses here that's an input for when you're creating your motor object. And the input represents what number port is the actual physical motor plugged into. So your motor's wires are going to be connected to some other wires on the electrical board. And those wires are going to be a motor controller that's called a Talon. And then the Talon is plugged into a port on the RoboRio, which is sort of like the computer. It's the CPU that's on the electrical board. So you actually have to look and see where is it plugged in. And there's going to be a number right next to where it's plugged in. And that's the number you want to set your motor port up here to be. So it could be 0, or it could be 3, or it could be something else. As long as that number is right, then whenever over here in the robot code we say like set the motor value, the motor subsystem is going to know exactly which motor do we want to be setting. We want to be setting the motor that's plugged into number 3 on the computer. So set motor value, this is the code that actually runs over here in robot when we say set the motor value. It's running this code. And what this code does is it actually takes your particular motor object and it tells it to set its own motor value. You don't really need to understand that. I just wanted to show you that it was doing something. If you want to, you can open up piston example subsystem and you'll see a similar kind of a thing. This word solenoid refers to the switch, which it's sort of like an electronic switch which triggers your piston. So it could tell your piston to extend or to retract. And then there's a couple of commands. So You can tell the piston to retract, or you could tell the piston to extend. And you don't need to change anything in here except for the port where the piston is plugged into. So it's the exact same deal. The little electronic switch, the solenoid, is going to be plugged into some port in the RoboRio, and you have to figure out which port number is it and type that number here. Okay, if you want to do something more complicated, like you want your motor or your piston to respond to buttons that you hit on the PS4 controller that we use, that's going to be more complicated. You'd need to actually dive into the commands section here and write a specific command. And then inside the operator interface, the OI method here, or sorry, the OI class here, you would need to do something like this. You would create a joystick button. This one's called run intake forward. And then you tell the joystick button that when it's being pressed down, it's got to run a new command, and you give it the name of the command. And this run intake command corresponds to a file over here in the intake section. Here it is, run intake. So when the button gets pressed, it's going to make a new intake command, and what the intake command does is defined over here in this file. How all that works is a little bit more complicated. If you're curious, you can either ask Rohan or ask another software person, or if you email me, there's a medium chance that I would record a video that shows you how to do it. Okay, I hope this has been some help. Good luck.